Hi, welcome to Reawakening Beauty. I'm your host, Shawna Patruno. I'm so excited to have you here. I love talking about all things skin-related, beauty-related, and mind-related. Here I empower you, mind, body, skin, and soul.
I have a very special guest, Meg, but I'll let you introduce yourself fully. And you have a background with helping people with food and anxiety. So thank you so much for being here. Would you like to introduce yourself for our guests before we get started?
I would love to. Yeah. Hi. My name is Meg De Jong, and I'm a registered holistic nutritionist. And as you said there, Shawna, I really focus on nutrition for anxiety as well as gut health because they really are so connected. And I currently live on Salt Spring Island, which is a small island off the coast of Vancouver, British Columbia, here in Canada. And yeah, I spend most of my time, working one-on-one with clients. So I do most of that virtually, which is great because I get to work with people from all over the world. And then I also have an online course that's called Eat to Ease Anxiety. I do nutrition workshops and I do lots of cooking and baking and have all sorts of delicious, different grounding, anxiety easing recipes that I share on my website and Instagram and all that kind of stuff.
That's amazing. So I'm so excited to have you here because I've struggled with anxiety, and I know after what we've gone through in the world, there's so many people who don't know about the food gut connection, which me and you both know a little bit about, but your study is this. So for our listeners today who may be struggling with anxiety, how exactly is anxiety and digestive issues connected?
Great question to kick us off. So yeah, it's really cool. There's a whole world of gut-brain connection and, more and more research is really coming out, diving into just how connected these two areas of our body are. So we actually have something called the gut-brain axis, and this just sort of describes the communication that is constantly happening between our brains and our guts. And there's so many different, I feel like we could spend the whole time in this podcast just talking about how connected they are and all the different mechanisms of the, gut-brain axis and how they really are always communicating with each other. But I'll share a few of the big ones. So the first one is neurotransmitter production. So there are so many different mood regulating neurotransmitters that are actually produced within our gut that go on to, dictate a lot of how we're feeling mentally. So whether that's serotonin, over 90 to 95% of serotonin is actually produced within our gut. And serotonin is kind of like our happy hormone or neurotransmitter. So it, really kind of contributes to that feeling of well-being and vitality and happiness. We also have 50% of our dopamine that is produced within our gut through the support of healthy gut bacteria. There's GABA, which is our most calming neurotransmitter that is produced within our gut. So many different, like I said, of these neurotransmitters that are produced within our gut. And a big mechanism of how they're produced is actually through the support of our gut bacteria. So I'm sure we'll kind of talk a little bit about this, but I share a lot about our gut microbiome. And what that really refers to is like all the living organisms within our gut that go on to, play out so many important roles and functions. A lot of them, a big part of that contributing to these neurotransmitter production. So, when we're looking at our gut health, we're really trying to increase the diversity of healthy bacteria that we have in our gut so they can go on to help support our body produce all of these mood regulating neurotransmitters. So hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, it does. For me, it definitely does. But for someone who's maybe not so sure about what exactly GABA is or serotonin and all of that, is there any easier way to break it down maybe for our audience who may be so unfamiliar with it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I think the important thing to remember, it's I like getting into all the technical terms of GABA, serotonin, dopamine, but at the end of the day, these are, neurotransmitters that communicate with our brain and kind of go on to give us these feelings. GABA, for example, is really associated with our feeling of calm. And it's kind of what would be stimulated when we are meditating or, doing yoga, that kind of thing. So I don't think it actually matters too much about what each specific one does, dopamine's our pleasure one. But I think it's just important to know that so many of these kind of neurotransmitters that kind of talk to our brain and communicate with our brain and have a lot of ability to dictate how we're feeling, a lot of them are associated with these, feelings of just feeling calm, feeling happy, feeling pleasurable, all of that. So it doesn't necessarily matter all the fancy names and things like that. It's just important to know that we need these gut bacteria to help support regulating our mood. So that's a really big one.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like the way you articulated it, perfect description and everything like that. So I have two questions for you, but I'll start with the first one. What made you interested in connecting nutrition and anxiety? What set you on this path?
Ooh, yes. I love answering this question, but one second, I'm going to circle back, Shawna, because I want to share a few other about the anxiety and the digestive issues. So
yeah,
just because it's so important, I want people to know. So another huge one is gut inflammation. So when we're constantly eating food that, really inflames our gut and, whether that's processed foods, we can get into talking about, what some of these things are that, might harm our gut. The minute our gut is inflamed or is just feeling irritated because of that gut-brain axis, it can actually send signals to our brain to be like, help, like we're inflamed, like something's not right here, we're under a lot of stress. And so that can also contribute to those feelings of anxiety and, unwellness and just kind of like discomfort mentally. So that's a huge one that I didn't want to miss because I think that's so important to know about that gut-brain connection.
Yeah. And I still want to ask you a few questions on that topic as well. Like, is there any specific foods that cause more inflammation that they're eating that you should avoid or anything like that? And I'm not trying to be like a dictator with that, but for myself, I know dairy is a huge trigger for me. I noticed my anxiety would go up with that. Is there any foods that you would say if someone's experiencing a lot of anxiety, foods that may not be serving them?
Absolutely. Yeah. Dairy is a huge one. I'm glad you said that. And I also love that you said where it's like, yeah, we're not trying to, promote food fear or food restriction. But I think it's the truth is like a lot of us are really sensitive, just the way our food system kind of works. There's, there can be so many hidden toxins and additives and things like that, like, I think it's so important to just at least be aware of them. And then we can feel more empowered in our food choices instead of just like eating something and be like, I don't know why this made me feel so awful. So thanks. Yeah. Thanks for asking. So I'd say dairy is a really big one. That's often one of the first things I'll look at with my clients. A lot of people are quite sensitive to dairy. The majority of the population actually loses the enzyme lactase, which breaks down lactose after the age of 5. So after they've stopped breastfeeding and have kind of, starting to grow up and, really have been eating adult food for a while, they really kind of lose that enzyme lactase that can process dairy. So that's a big one. And then I would say too, going back to the gut inflammation, there's a lot of, kind of talk and research about just any sort of like refined sugars, refined grains, artificial sweeteners like aspartame, like things that are kind of like man-made. I have, when I'm explaining this to clients, there's like, I go over 4 pillars of a diet to ease anxiety. And the first one is whole foods. And it's like pretty much just wanting to get as many whole foods in our diet as we can. So, foods that are found in nature and eaten as closely as to the way they're found as possible. That's going to like really ensure our body's getting all the nutrients and then it hasn't been, refined and stripped of its nutrients and it hasn't had, lots of chemicals added to it, or even the way it's grown, like with pesticides. Like we want to try to eat, more organic food to help, support our gut that way to not cause gut inflammation in that sense. So those are some big ones. I definitely say dairy, and then just like processed foods or, foods that do contain chemicals, pesticides, that kind of stuff, really just wanting to focus on eating those whole foods. And of course, not stressing when we don't, because life is life and, we're going to,
for sure.
But just keeping it in mind.
Yeah, I've seen so many, like I talk more about the skin side. So I'm really happy you're talking about like the anxiety side because I saw both sides like show up on my skin. So obviously cutting out maybe like the fake stuff, definitely. What foods do you find are really good to kind of enhance like your mood or kind of help with feelings of calmness that you could kind of put into your diet? Are there any foods that would be really great? I take a pre and probiotic daily, and I also take vitamin B and stuff like that. But are there foods that you would recommend?
Absolutely. Yes. I love that you said pre and probiotic because fermented foods is definitely usually on my list with clients. It's like one of the, earlier things we'll do is like, let's try to get in at least one fermented food a day. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with gut health, where we're really wanting to support the production of these healthy gut bacteria and really feed our healthy gut bacteria so they can go on to support our neurotransmitter production. So I'd say fermented foods are a huge one. I'm a super huge advocate for like really focusing on having a really grounding, nourishing, intuitive diet. So I think it's like so important. Yeah. Yeah. So like foods that really feed your soul and also ground you. So for me, one of my biggest ones is baked yams. Like I swear I could eat baked yams like every single day. So, like foods like that, or even like quinoa, any of our like really complex carbs are amazing. And then also our healthy fats are so important too. So like our omega-3 fatty acids, our avocado, olives, olive oil, like that kind of stuff. Anything that's really going to help to stabilize our blood sugars and also give our brain the nutrients that it needs to stay calm and regulate our mood.
So for omega-3, what would be examples for someone who doesn't know? Like where would they find those sourced?
For sure. So omega-3s are a very specific subset of fat. It has to do with why they're called omega-3s. It really just has to do with the chemistry of them, which we don't need to get into. But yeah, it's really important to pay attention to our omega-3 consumption because they are, as you kind of alluded to there, Shawna, in some very specific foods that if we aren't aware, we might just totally bypass them. So one of the best sources of our omega-3 fatty acids would be in our seafood. So like our wild fish, our algae, seaweeds, those are great. Like looking to the sea for our omega-3s is really, really important and amazing. And then also walnuts are a great source of omega-3s. Ground flax seeds are a good source. Pasture raised eggs, sometimes there can be a good source of omega-3s in there. Those are kind of the specific ones. There's a bit in hemp hearts. So like I said, you kind of have to like pay attention and be like, okay, am I getting these in?
Yeah, because I know hemp hearts have 3, 6, and 9. Now I have a question for you. Is it okay if you pair the other fatty acids with the omega-3, or is it better that it's kind of working alone for anxiety?
Absolutely. Definitely feel free to pair. I think it's so like our bodies are so smart and so cool. And like, there are lots of things where it's like, okay, don't have your iron with your calcium because that might negate the absorption. But I think for the most part, when we're consuming these like whole food diets and we're eating food in their most whole form, it's like nature's so cool. So I feel like hemp hearts is a great example of this. Like you said, it contains 3, 6, and 9. And if we eat it, it's like, yes, we can absolutely absorb all of those. And it's actually really important because when we are looking at our omega-3 fatty acids, we just want to make sure that our ratio of omega-6 fatty acids to omega-3s is like, like a really equal ratio. So eating something like hemp hearts is like amazing and perfect.
That's awesome. Now, for someone who's really struggling with anxiety, is there particular things that you would say like to start doing instantaneously if they're really, really in a stressed out state? We talked a little bit about things to avoid and that kind of thing, but is there anything that you would say to somebody right now? Like they would probably feel a difference in a couple of weeks as far as like nutrition wise.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. I'm glad you specified on nutrition because I was like, you know what, we could get into this for sure. My first one is just to tell people like, I mean, I don't know what people are going through, whoever might be listening to this, but like, just know if you're struggling a lot with anxiety, it's okay. And like, I know how awful and horrible and lonely and isolating and scary it can feel, but just to know like you can get through this and like, reminding ourselves we're not our thoughts and we're not our mind and we don't need to listen to every thought we think and all of that kind of stuff is so, so important. But that's a whole other topic. In terms
Absolutely.
In terms of nutrition, I would say, so one of the very first things I did and something I often encourage clients to is look at their caffeine consumption. So that's
yes,
right? It's one of those ones where people are often like, oh, but I love my coffee. But like, honestly, if you're in the depths of anxiety and your mind is just feeling like it's going everywhere, we want to go back to that form of like grounding and, avoid these kind of stimulants that can just like make our mind go like 100 miles an hour faster than it already is, So I'd say looking at the caffeine consumption is a huge one. And then my other kind of like quick go-to thing would be looking at your blood sugar balance. So
Yeah.
So by this, I mean just really trying to help keep our blood sugar levels or our blood glucose levels stabilized throughout the day, because that can be a huge trigger for anxiety. I don't know if anyone has had this experience where maybe they like forgot to eat breakfast, or the opposite, they like wanted to have like coffee and like a super sugary muffin with white flour, white sugar, whatever it might have been. It's like, of course that's okay, but you might have noticed like your blood sugar skyrocketing, where you like felt like amazing for a few minutes because you're like, I got all this sugar, I got my caffeine. And so like you would have felt that like glucose high, but only to find maybe like 45 minutes later, your blood sugar is crashing. So you burn through that kind of stuff so quick. And then like your anxiety might have skyrocketed as your blood sugars were going up. And then as they go down, like you're kind of on this blood sugar roller coaster, and your mind hates that. It's like, no, give me, give me stability, give me protein, carbs, fats, vegetables, like give me all of those things so that I can, feel stabilized, feel grounded. So that's like, I'd say the first thing to look at, other than the caffeine, or even alcohol is a big one too, just because it can be such a trigger. I would say to really get those blood sugars stabilized. So focus on breakfast, lunch, dinner, and eating meals with a kind of right mix of micro and macronutrients. So being sure you're getting in a protein source, a healthy fat source, a complex carbohydrate source, and, fruit or vegetables with every single meal, especially vegetables.
For sure. It's funny you mentioned that. I really have struggled with, if I don't eat, my anxiety gets higher. Like I noticed by the end of the day, I'm very irritable and that kind of thing. I've connected it for my own anxiety. So it's interesting that you said that. Why exactly does that happen for someone? Is it like their cortisol is going higher? And why does that happen for some people and not others?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And that brings up, the point of bio-individuality, and our bodies are all so different, so it's like everything I'm saying, it's like, take it with a grain of salt and, find what works for you. But I think for a lot of people, especially those of us who are more prone to anxiety, blood sugar balance is so important, because, when our blood sugars do either go up or go down, like you mentioned, when you haven't eaten, it does really send like a hormonal stress response to our entire body, because our body's like, you know what, I haven't had the nutrients I need. My glucose levels are dropping low or high, whatever it might be. So yes, like you mentioned cortisol, it's like absolutely our cortisol is going up. So that's our main stress hormone. And our body's just like fighting to kind of keep that homeostasis, because it doesn't like, these highs and lows of our blood levels, our blood sugar levels, and things like that. So I think that's a huge factor. It's like when we're on that blood sugar roller coaster, we haven't eaten enough throughout the day, everything's kind of dropping, getting low, but our cortisol is getting high because our body just feels stressed and almost like unsafe or uncomfortable. And it does put a lot of strain on our body and then our mind.
That makes a lot of sense. I know also coffee, I tell people come off coffee a lot for other reasons. Like I talk about the skin, but I noticed that it does heighten anxiety, but I've heard that's linked to adrenal and adrenal burnout. Like, do you have anything to say on that topic?
Yeah, really good question. So definitely like adrenals, coffee, that's a huge one. I think, coffee or caffeine in general is just such an interesting one. And I'm totally with you. I'm often telling people like, let's lessen your coffee or switch to decaf, or like, I love making like cacao elixirs that have like, cacao and, almond butter, like keep things blood sugar stabilized. But yeah, so there's definitely, I think for everyone, it's probably a different, there's lots of different mechanisms as to why caffeine can be quite triggering. Like you mentioned, adrenals is a huge one. Another one is just that like caffeine is such a stimulant, right? It's kind of like that drug of choice for so many people, where they wake up and it's like, yes, give me a caffeine, give me some sort of boost. And I think just for someone who might not be feeling super grounded and whose anxiety is quite high already, adding that extra oomph is a bit of a dangerous slippery slope, where like all of a sudden your body might feel like more awake, but your mind is like overly stimulated.
Yeah. I love that you gave examples of other things, alternatives that you could use, like the cacao, turmeric. I do turmeric and rose lattes. Like I really like them because I really think like rose has like a really calming feeling to it. So I love doing that one. Is there anything else that you would say about this connection? Like something that I haven't asked you that you feel like it's on your heart to really share on this topic?
Ooh, let me think for a second. Yeah, I think, so the big ones that I look at with people that I'm often explaining to people about, like when people are kind of like, where do I start with my diet to ease anxiety? So I would say the biggest kind of areas that are often imbalanced for people that can trigger to anxiety, we've covered a lot of them. So I'd say one of them would be gut health and just having gut health issues. So your gut's inflamed and it's sending those stress signals to the brain, or you're not producing the right neurotransmitters. That's a huge one. Blood sugars is another huge one, which is like a quick fix for a lot of people just to get in those balanced meals. Then there's a couple others I'd say that I really look at. So another one is hormonal imbalance. So especially true for women, but also for men. But we'll talk about women here. So like, if our estrogen and progesterone levels are off, like that can be a huge, huge trigger for anxiety. And I'm sure someone listening has probably had this experience where, maybe the week leading up to their period when they might be experiencing some of those PMS symptoms, like anxiety can be a lot worse. And that usually has to do with either too low of progesterone levels or too high of estrogen levels, like, so many different things going on that when I'm working with clients, we're kind of getting to the bottom of. So I'd say hormonal balance is a huge one as it relates to anxiety and really wanting to keep our hormones in check. And then another one is inflammation, which I kind of alluded to with gut health. It's like, when our body's constantly inflamed, that sends triggers to our brain where it's like, okay, now this creates neuroinflammation, and that's what can lead to anxiety as well as other mental health conditions.
And how long does it take? Because obviously we know that our nutrition impacts that. So say someone does have inflammation, how long would it take with working with your body and not being in that, like you're not going on an extreme change to heal your gut? And what are some healthy things to encompass to heal your stomach and that inflammation?
Right. Yeah. So I think, in terms of timelines, like everyone is so different. Some clients are, it's like we're working together for 1 week and they're already like, oh my gosh, I feel so much more calm and grounded.
Yeah.
But I have an anxiety reduction protocol, like a nutrition, that's kind of like my nutrition program that I work one-on-one with people. And it's a minimum of 3 months. And the reason being is like, I find 3 months is usually kind of that minimum time frame where people have made changes, incorporated them, are actually like making them part of their routine and are really starting to notice a difference. So I would say, like, for anyone who, might start trying some of this stuff, it's like, don't get discouraged if you don't feel amazing after the first week, because like, our bodies are amazing and adaptable, but some of these things, they do take long. And this could have been like years of, eating lots of inflammatory foods or processed foods, or, having really imbalanced hormones. Hormones are one of the slower ones that take to regulate. So I would say, it really can be, the time frame is very wide open. It just depends on the person, but definitely give it at least that 3-month mark until you really like assess and be like, okay, is this working?
Yeah, it's the same with like a lot of the clients that I work with. I notice like people want all or nothing, and it's like, it didn't take you this long to get into this state. So kind of allow your body. It's like going to the gym. Like you don't all of a sudden start working out like every single day. You don't take rest days. Like you really have to kind of ease into it. Do you have a story of like hope that you kind of went through, or something you wanted to share about your own journey and why you started this whole mission for yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, for me, now as I look back, I can realize I was probably anxious. My first like memories of anxiety were probably like when I was like 5 or 6 years old. But like at the time, you don't really know it's anxiety. But like, I remember just feeling so afraid. Like I would hear a story that happened to someone, and I remember just like, crying, and my mom would be like, what's wrong? And I'd be like, I'm so scared that's going to happen. And she was like, where is this coming from? Like, yeah. So like I did struggle with anxiety a lot growing up. And then it was around the age of 14, which I was actually diagnosed with an eating disorder. So I was struggling a lot with my food, my relationship to food, my body, which a lot of research too talks about like how it really is just like another form of anxiety, when we are struggling with food. And it was kind of, for me, it was absolutely like that outlet. Like I could worry about my food and body and try to control that, because like I was just feeling so anxious and ungrounded. So I struggled with that for quite a few years actually. And then after that, like I feel like I kind of, really learned how to manage my eating disorder and felt so much better and was a lot healthier. And then it was like another thing happened where I was really struggling with generalized anxiety. And then I was diagnosed with OCD. So like it was kind of just this like never ending cycle where like I would learn how to like manage one condition, but then another thing would appear. And I think, a big factor of that had to do with the fact because like I wasn't actually getting to the root of my anxiety. Yeah. And when I say this too, it's like there's so many avenues. And I always remind people, it's like nutrition is one very important tool to managing our anxiety. But of course, it's not like the end all be all. And I've worked with therapists, I've done acupuncture, I did massage, like essential oils, like yoga, meditation. Like literally, I say I've done every anxiety remedy under the sun. But it wasn't until I really understood nutrition and the imbalances that I was facing within my body did it really all kind of like that light bulb moment where you're like, oh, like everything's connected. Like what I put into my body actually impacts my mind. So yeah, for me, it was that long journey of, figuring it out and a lot of trial and error and doing so many different remedies and avenues and things. But yeah, I think that's a very condensed version of my story, where it wasn't even until I went to school to become a nutritionist did I really understand like, oh, like diet and anxiety. Okay, I get it now, know? And then it was like, I could just see it in my own life so clearly. Like once I kind of paid attention to my gut issues and I got my hormones in check and all of these things, everything just sort of like fell a lot more into place in terms of just how I felt in my mind.
That makes so much sense. And it's so funny that we connected. Like, I really do believe everything happens for a reason. But thank you for sharing so openly and heartfeltly, because I had a very similar experience. And honestly, I love what you're doing and how you're taking those struggles that you went through to help others. I really appreciate it, because I know that so many people think that there's something wrong with them. And like, I had another guest and she said, as you heal, you peel, right? So we often have these like eating disorders or different things to like cover up like their underlying root issue, right? That we kind of stuff down. And then you're like, you know what? Everything's so connected. Like my mind, my skin, my brain, my health, it's all intertwined. And what you feed yourself mentally and physically, which I love that you circled back to that with the mindfulness and like meditation you spoke briefly in the beginning about. It's so interconnected. And I think it's beautiful what you're doing. I wanted
to. Yeah. And same to you. It's so true. And I think it's just so beautiful too. And nowadays, because like, there's so many different tools and different avenues. And for me, I'm just always reminding people, it's like your food is a tool for self-love. It's a tool to feel grounded. It's a tool to feel nourished. It's a tool to nourish not just your body and mind, but your soul too. And like express creativity and all of these things. And, for everyone, it's not going to be like, woo, I love cooking and this is so fun. But like, I think the more that we can like at least just be aware that we can use these things like not as a form of restriction or punishment. And it can just be this like beautiful gift for our life and for our bodies and minds. I think it's so important. And it's like, I know you do that too. Like you've been talking about like with the skin and all of this, it's just like these issues appear and then we gotta like you said, kind of dig deeper and look at them to really get to the root of what our body and soul are craving.
Yeah. For me, like my anxiety came out in skin issues. So I had rosacea, which again, related to the gut. So I didn't realize, but I was such an anxious person. So when I was at work, I would get really red and I'm like, well, I do all the right things, but it wasn't until I kind of replaced things that were more healthier for my gut, So like the dairy really caused a lot of problems for me. And it was only until I went to a homeopathic doctor and I spoke with her and she's like, have you tried kind of looking at things and like showed me alternatives? But everyone is so unique and different, right? Like my journey is not going to be the same as your journey or somebody else's. So I really do think like working with a professional or something like that and not self-diagnosing any of that stuff is really helpful, because it was until I kind of worked with someone. So I'm so happy you're sharing your tips. Is there anything else that you think that would be kind of impactful that we could leave our listeners with today? We spoke a little bit about feeding our body. Is there anything that you would say about feeding your mind, like the mental diet? Because you did speak a little bit about that before we wrap up.
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's a huge element of, to kind of bring it all back together. It's like, that point of eating for self-love. And I always say, like, I have my 4 pillars of a diet to ease anxiety. And then I always say, like, my bonus pillar is like eating with self-love, and like really, finding the foods that like you love and that feel good for your body. And like, it's so interesting. Like I mentioned mine, like of like yams, where I feel like baked yams is just like, that's such a comfort food for me. I know it's kind of random. I also love dark chocolate and sourdough bread.
I love
stuff.
them too.
Yeah. Right? So good. But like, I think it's just like really like getting in touch with like what your body craves, and finding like maybe some of the like healthier, more nourishing alternatives. Like I know, with clients where it's like, they'll say like, like, oh, my favorite food is like hash browns or something. And I'm like, okay, great. Let's work with that. Like, can you make your own like delicious roasted potatoes with healthy olive oil and like rosemary and sea salt? And like, like how can we healthify these things so they still taste amazing and really feed you, but are also feeding your mind and nourishing your body. So I think just know that like you can find all of these delicious foods and your taste buds will change over time and you'll adapt. And like, I know a lot of people when they start working, they don't really like the taste of fermented foods. Like sauerkraut is like, that's disgusting. And like, can you relate or?
Your palate changes 100%. Like I remember thinking that like, cause there was sugar in everything. Like I grew up and everything had sugar in it. And then I started kind of cutting it out and having sauerkraut and kombucha, which kind of like when I first started having kombucha with like no sugar, I'm like, this tastes like vinegar.
Yes.
So you're just like, what is this? But as you start to feel better, you actually crave them. And then you realize you're like, oh my gosh, like my anxiety or my mood's starting to feel better. You're sleeping better. Everything starts to fall into place. You're looking better. Your energy just feels lighter. And then all of a sudden you're like, you start to crave those foods. But sauerkraut was a weird one for me as well. And kombucha, I was like, okay. But I love dark chocolate for the iron. And I find dark chocolate really calming. It just has a very calming feeling to it, especially at that time of the month. So it's so good. But yeah, is there a superfood that you think that everybody should be having if they're open to it besides yams?
Ooh, okay, good. Yeah. Besides, yes. I mean, I'm right there with you. I think dark chocolate is like one of the best foods in the world. And it's actually really cool. They've done studies, like there's actual scientific studies published about dark chocolate and how it actually has been found to like help relieve stress. And like part of that, I think, is just that like dopamine rush we get from like eating it. And it does feel so good. So I definitely would say dark chocolate is a great one. And just like, again, it goes back to quality. So like, can you find like a great organic fair trade dark chocolate that's, I usually say 70% or higher is what you want to aim for. So that's a great one. Yeah. And I think too, like I could name all sorts of different like superfoods. Like I love ashwagandha powder and like spirulina and all of these stuff. But when you're just starting out, like it's like go back to the whole foods, like go back to the basics. It's like how many like beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, like wild fish, pasture raised eggs, fresh fruits, fresh vegetables can I eat? And like really focus on that, because kind of circling back to gut health, one of the most important factors, there was the largest study actually ever done on the human microbiome. It was called the American Gut Project, and it was done in 2012. And one of the biggest findings from it was that those that kind of were found to have had the most diverse microbiomes were the ones that ate at least 30 different plant species in a week. So, eating all sorts of different fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, nuts, seeds, all of that helps to feed the diversity of your microbiome, which I was talking about at the beginning, where it's like we need, all sorts of different healthy bacteria to produce our neurotransmitters and to help us feel calm and stable and all of that stuff. So I would say in terms of superfoods, it's like eat the rainbow, eat real foods that come from this earth, like fresh berries loaded with antioxidants and carrots, like root veggies are so grounding, I always say, because they grow in the ground, and kale, lettuce, arugula, like mix up what you eat and have different types of protein and find what feels great for you, and then never stop experimenting and trying and adding new things and stuff like that.
Love that. I think that's great advice. I really appreciate you being on here, and I obviously would love you to talk more, but I want to honor your time. So hopefully we can maybe have you back and we can kind of deep dive or see what people think of this. And if they have any questions, if someone's wanting to reach out to you, Meg, where can they find you? Because I know you post really cool recipes. I've been following you. She has an amazing Instagram. Where can they find you?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, for sure. So you can find me on Instagram. My Instagram name is @Meg DeJong. So DeJong. meg.nutrition. So that's a great way to find me. I'm sure people could find me on your page too, Shawna, like through following or whatever, or you can post it on the show notes. So yeah, my Instagram's great. And then my website too. I do have lots of recipes on my website, and that's a great place to reach out if you want to learn more about my one-on-one programs or my Eat to Ease Anxiety course or working together, and also my recipes. So that's just megdeyoungnutrition.com. So those are the two best places to find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone who listened to Reawakening Beauty. Anything else before we go?
No, thank you for having me. And yeah, just sending so much love to everyone listening and who might be going through a stressful time or anxious time or whatever. Just know there's so many tools and resources available to you, and you can absolutely get through this. And, you know, we're all so much stronger, I think, than what our minds give us credit for sometimes. So don't let your mind bully you to think that you can't get through whatever you're going through. So yeah, sending lots of love.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to the latest episode of Reawakening Beauty. Subscribe to the podcast, hear more inspirational stories and tips related to all things mind, beauty, skin, and soul. I also encourage you to check out the show notes for additional information about my guest, the topics discussed during the episode, and of course, more information about me, your host, Shawna Patruno. If you want to be a guest on the show or just want to reach out and say hi, you can reach me on Instagram, LinkedIn, or email. All these details can be found in my show notes. Thank you so much for listening and have an amazing day.